How do you explain waking up somewhere you never planned to be, next to someone you should never have been near? I told myself that one blurry night on a work trip meant nothing, that a good husband would understand, forgive, and move on. But what happens when the man who always stayed quiet suddenly stops asking questions altogether, and the silence starts to feel like something far worse than an argument? My name is Solène Marsh, 34, events coordinator at Unraveling Group. I make everything look effortless, 200 people walking into a perfectly prepared room without seeing the work. I apply the same skill to my marriage. Declan, my husband, 37, is a logistics manager, dependable, steady, and sometimes so methodical, I've wondered whether I married a person or a calendar system. I tell myself I love him. Most days I believe it. The Harwick conference was a 2-day corporate event, 4 hours from home, where everyone stayed in the same building and professional boundaries dissolved by the second evening. My supervisor, Griffin Tate, VP of events, 46 and polished, had always been slightly warmer with me than the rest of the team. I'd called it professional regard. By the second night, that explanation was failing. I remember the bar, Griffin ordering a second round before I'd finished the first. A real laugh, the kind that loosens something behind your sternum. Then nothing. Next, my alarm at 6:14 a.m. A ceiling the wrong shade of white, sheets that weren't mine. Room 714, Griffin's room. His name on the nightstand card. He was asleep beside me. My dress was over the armchair, one shoe by the door, the other near the minibar. I sat up carefully and told myself this was not what it looked like. I texted Griffin from the elevator, one line. He left it on read. Back in room 609, I showered for 20 minutes and built my story. Dinner ran late, lots of wine, back to my room by 11, phone died. Internally consistent, no loose threads. I rehearsed it on the train home. Declan was in the living room when I arrived. Noah, our son, was in the bath. Declan stood, not warmly but with practiced calm. He asked about the trip. I said fine, tiring. He asked what time I got to my room. Just after 11. He said he'd called at 11:30 and got voicemail. I said the battery died. He noted carefully that I'd answered his 7 a.m. text before the shuttle, meaning the phone had charged overnight, and asked where I'd plugged it in. I said the hotel USB port. He said okay and picked up his soup. Later, after Noah was asleep, he told me something about my communication felt different since Thursday. My posture, my eye contact. He wasn't accusing me, he said, but they'd agreed 2 years ago to speak up before things became walls. He asked if there was anything I wanted to tell him. I said I was exhausted and that analysing my body language like a behavioural report was draining. He didn't push it. He went to bed. I sat alone with Griffin's contact on my screen, pressing nothing. When I finally went to bed, the charging cable Declan always kept by his lamp had been moved to the desk in the corner. The lamp was on. He was asleep, or looked it. In the morning, his phone screen briefly showed a calendar entry. Fernwood Street, 8:30 a.m., set for the following Thursday. No name, no note. He cleared it and asked Noah if he wanted his crusts cut. That evening, an automated expense summary from the Harwick conference arrived in our joint inbox. The laptop was open on the kitchen counter. The summary showed my room, 609, and the restaurant charge, but also a room service order on my corporate card, processed at 12:43 a.m., tagged to a floor delivery. The floor listed was not level 6. Monday felt normal. The office hum, the printer corridor, Griffin's blinds at 1/3 open. I stood at the printer too long watching his office. He didn't come out. At 2, he ran the Harwick debrief for the whole events team. Priya Senthil from compliance sat at the far end with her yellow legal pad and mechanical pencil, making precise notes. When Griffin mentioned reviewing the hotel vendor relationship for transparency, Priya looked up, wrote something, looked back down. Griffin's eye contact with me was identical to his eye contact with everyone else at the table. That afternoon in the parking garage, I overheard one of Declan's carpool contacts saying Declan had been different lately. Quieter, leaving team lunch early 2 Fridays running for unexplained appointments. I told myself it was nothing. Tuesday evening at Cleo's, surrounded by print proofs and cartridge ink, I told her almost everything. Room 714, the memory gap, the expense charge Declan had seen. What I didn't tell her was that the hotel's digital access record showed my lanyard badge entering room 714 at 11:58 p.m. and not leaving until 6:22 a.m. I'd found it by accident while reviewing the expense report and closed the tab without correcting anything. Cleo said a husband who cross-referenced expense reports with floor delivery timestamps wasn't a husband, but an auditor in the wrong contract, and I felt better the way you feel better when someone mirrors your story back without checking whether it's true. Leaving Cleo's building, I passed Priya in the hallway. She lived on a different floor. Pleasant hello. 4 seconds. Her eyes made the kind of quiet note compliance-trained people make without knowing it. I didn't think about it again until much later, when I should have thought about it much sooner. Wednesday night, Declan was at his desk. 3 folders were stacked in the open instead of in the drawer. Utilities, auto, and a third marked only with blue painter's tape, no label, noticeably thicker than the others. He said he was catching up on filing and didn't turn around. Later, he showed me the room service receipt on his phone, the 12:43 a.m. timestamp, the level 7 floor delivery, and asked why it was billed to my corporate card when my room was on level 6. I said the billing systems sometimes mistagged floor codes. He asked for the front desk manager's name. I said I hadn't caught it. He said the expense report also paired my employee ID with room 714 as the delivery destination, and that 2 documents with the same discrepancy weren't a glitch. He asked whose name was on 714's booking. I said I must have been moved without being told. He said the booking was placed 14 days in advance, not on arrival. Then, without sharpness, he said that if I had something to tell him about Harwick and chose not to, he would separate our shared accounts. Not as punishment, but as a practical adjustment, because a joint account required shared transparency. He said he was telling me first because I deserved to know. I said ultimatums dressed as logistics were still ultimatums, that I wouldn't be financially controlled, and that his reaction to one ambiguous line item said more about his trust levels than about me. He said he was open to counselling. I said I meant for him, individually. He went to bed. The Home Office door closed softly, then nothing, which was worse than an argument. Thursday he was gone before 8. No note, no text. On his desk screen, Fernwood Street, 8:30 a.m., dismissed. He came back before dinner with a wrapped book for Noah from a charity shop, warm and easy in a way I hadn't seen from him in a week. That same day, the company photographer shared a photo from the Harwick dinner in the internal team channel. Griffin close on my right, my head angled toward him at a proximity that wasn't standard professional distance. Priya saw it and said nothing. Cleo sent a heart emoji. And Declan, through a shared streaming account linked to my work social channel, set up 18 months ago and completely forgotten, received an automated notification with the photo embedded in it. The Aldervane Annual Awards Banquet was held on the rooftop event hall of the main tower building, reached by a glass elevator that opened directly onto the space. White linen tablecloths, copper wire fairy lights strung across the ceiling, catering stations placed at even intervals, and 200 people from the regional offices filling the room with the kind of noise that makes individual conversations feel private even when they are not. I arrived in the 4th elevator group and found Griffin near the senior leadership table before I had made it 20 steps across the floor. He was talking to the regional director, and he met my eyes once and went back to his conversation. And I understood from the economy of that single look that he had decided the evening would proceed as if Harwick had not altered anything between us. I went to my events team table. Cleo was there as a contracted designer for the evening, the table was in good spirits, and the champagne arrived early. By the time the main course was cleared, I had had 3 glasses, and the warmth of a good evening sat somewhere between my throat and my chest. Someone at the table asked, casually, the way people ask things when professional and personal have blurred for the evening, whether I had a partner who might be jealous of all these late work events. I said I had a husband who counted the evenings I was not home the way other people counted calories, and I said it with a brightness in my tone that made the table laugh, and the laughter pulled me further than I had planned to go. I said that marrying someone safe instead of interesting was a mistake women made at 30 and spent the rest of their 30s correcting, and that Declan's job managing freight logistics was essentially a very detailed way of being invisible, and that sometimes I genuinely wondered whether I would notice the difference if he were replaced with a more organized version of the same person. The table laughed again. The table did not know Declan. What I had not registered was that Priya Senthil was standing 3 feet to my left, at the champagne station, waiting for a server refill. She heard every word. Her face did not change. She took her glass and returned to her table, and wrote 2 small notes on the folded card she kept in her jacket pocket, because Priya's compliance work required her to document cultural and behavioral patterns across the workplace, and what she had just overheard was at minimum a data point worth recording. Griffin spent the entire evening at the senior leadership table and did not come to mine. When we crossed paths near the awards presentation, he congratulated my team with the same warmth he would have used for any team, and moved to the next group immediately. His lanyard was clipped correctly. He looked like someone who had nothing to explain to anyone. I arrived home after 11. Declan was on the sofa with a book open to a page he had not advanced in the time I had been gone. I could tell by the exact spot where I had last seen the bookmark the previous evening. He asked how the banquet was. I said good, fun, great table. He told me he had received a message from Remy, his sister, who had heard from a mutual contact at a different banquet table that someone from the events team had described a husband whose job was essentially invisible and who could be swapped for a more organized version of himself. He said he was asking whether that was me, because the phrase more organized version was specific enough that he wanted to hear my account before forming any view. He said Remy had the exact words. I said I had made an offhand social remark during dinner, in a context where it meant nothing, and that forensically reconstructing a dinner table conversation was the behavior of someone who could not handle the fact that his wife had a social life. He said he was not asking about the context. He was asking whether I actually found his job invisible and his personality replaceable, because if I did, he needed to know that as information about the state of our marriage, not as a criticism, but as a fact he could work with. I said I was clearly describing a cultural pattern that any woman would recognize, and that he was turning a dinner table observation into a confession. He asked me then, and the question had a precision that left no sideways exit, what I had meant by correcting the mistake of marrying safe, and whether that referred to our marriage specifically or to a general principle I was applying to other people, because if it was our marriage, I owed him clarity, and if it was a general principle, he needed to know why I had chosen to express it at a company event where colleagues who knew his name by face were present. He said the question was not about his feelings. It was about honesty and the public framing of a marriage I had described from a banquet table. I said I was talking about a societal pattern and that he was making me feel like a defendant at my own kitchen table, and I went upstairs. He said, before I reached the hallway, that he had offered counselling twice and was offering it a 3rd time, not for the relationship's sake but for Noah's, because a child who grows up in a house where one parent publicly diminishes the other eventually learns which parent to take seriously. I told him he was using Noah as emotional leverage, which was transparent, and I went up. He did not follow. I heard the 2nd bedroom door open and close quietly. The next morning I came downstairs and made coffee and placed a cup on his side of the table, something I had not done in weeks, and told him I thought we should have a real conversation. I said I was sorry the banquet comment had gotten out and that it had been misread out of context, and that I would be willing to attend one session of couples counselling if we agreed to approach it as a genuine fresh start without bringing up Harwick. He listened to all of it. He said he was glad I wanted to talk, and then he said that a counselling session offered as a negotiated condition, one session, with Harwick excluded in advance, was not a fresh start, but a transaction, and he was not interested in a transaction. He said a counsellor would need the complete picture, or we would be paying someone to watch us perform versions of ourselves for an hour. He said if I was willing to go without conditions, he would make the appointment that morning. I said that his insistence on including Harwick was the very obstacle I was trying to remove, and that he was blocking the fresh start he claimed to want. He said that meant I was not actually offering one. He picked up his coffee and went to get Noah ready for school. That Tuesday, a notification appeared briefly on the home laptop screensaver before clearing itself. Birch Row, 11 a.m., Thursday. Below it, a Cloud Sync banner. Upload complete, 4 of 4 files. I stood in the kitchen watching both things fade from the screen and could not decide which one unsettled me more. Remy's kitchen table had always been where the hard Marsh family conversations happened. That Saturday it felt different. Remy's posture was polite but closed in a way it had never been. She made tea and said, without building toward it, that she'd heard the banquet comment from a mutual contact. She wasn't judging, but the Declan she'd spoken to 3 times in 2 weeks was not the one she'd known for 37 years, present, organised, and completely unreachable. That combination worried her more than visible anger would have. I said Declan had been cold and controlling, that the banquet remark was harmless and weaponized by people who didn't understand our marriage. Remy stirred her tea. Then she said Declan had told her about the travel report and the room service charge. Going forward, she'd be asking only about Noah's well-being. She refilled the kettle, and I understood that whatever neutrality she'd held toward me had been quietly closed. That evening, Declan sat across from me, hands flat on the table, no devices. He said he needed to discuss home structure, not feelings, because feelings had become where every conversation derailed. He'd covered 4 extra school pickups in 3 weeks and needed a consistent schedule because unpredictable absences affected Noah's routine. He named the dates. I said asking for a weekly schedule was surveillance dressed as parenting. He said he'd named 4 times I arrived over an hour late without messaging, and offered to share his own schedule reciprocally. I said I'd text when plans changed. He named 3 recent times I hadn't. Then he asked, with the conference lanyard Noah had found in my bag sitting on the counter 3 feet away, whether I understood that modern lanyards with magnetic strips logged door access as part of hotel security audits. A colleague in building access had mentioned it at lunch. Did I understand what the record attached to my badge would show? I said his colleague was wrong, and that constructing a theory from a lunch conversation was obsessive. He said he hadn't constructed anything. He asked whether I was frightened of the records because I had nothing to worry about, or because I did. I pushed back from the table. Before I left, he said he'd rescheduled counselling for Tuesday at 6:30. The mediator's details were on the counter, and he'd take Noah to Remy's so we could attend. Not a commitment about the marriage, just 1 hour in a neutral room. I said scheduling without asking was exactly the unilateral behaviour I'd been describing. He said he'd asked 4 times. I said I couldn't be expected to remember questions buried inside interrogations. He set the note card down and went to bed. Tuesday in the pickup line, a mother named Harriet asked gently whether everything was all right at home. Noah had told his teacher that Daddy was sleeping in the guest room, and Mummy said Daddy was being weird. The teacher had flagged it. I said children exaggerated. The specific humiliation of a 6-year-old's honest account, delivered in another parent's gentle voice, stayed with me the entire drive home. That evening Declan came home from the mediator, which he'd attended alone. He cooked for Noah, helped with reading homework, then went to the home office with the door slightly open. I heard a new sound, a small definitive click from the desk drawer. Through the gap I saw a padlock fitted to the lower drawer, where the folder with the blue painter's tape lived. He wasn't touching it. He was writing in a small notebook I'd never seen. I turned away without speaking. Saturday morning, while Declan took Noah to swimming, I posted the conference dinner photo, Griffin's shoulder against mine, both mid-laugh, champagne glasses in frame. Captioned, "Work hard enough and you get evenings like this," tagged the event, not Griffin, though his name was visible on a table placard. 41 likes in 2 hours. At 12:47, Griffin called from an unknown number, clipped and careful, telling me to take it down. His wife had been shown it by a mutual contact, and he was managing a situation more complicated than he'd intended. More complicated than he had intended, about a night he'd participated in equally. I heard exactly what that meant. I removed it at 1:15. Priya Senthil had already liked it and saved a time-stamped copy. Declan had screenshotted it at 11:47 a.m. before 20 likes, and saved it in a dated folder because a notification had come through the linked streaming account I'd forgotten still existed. That evening I opened the household email for a grocery receipt and found a message from Aldervane HR addressed to Declan. Follow-up. Reference. ALD/HR/3847. Dear Mr. Marsh, this is to confirm receipt of the documentation you submitted on. I closed it without opening it and stood at the kitchen counter with Noah's film playing in the next room, understanding that something had already been sent, received, and confirmed, and that I was the last person in this house to know about it. Monday morning, flat grey light, fourth bad night's sleep. Declan was already in his coat, keys by the door. I asked to talk. He set his keys down and said he was listening. I told him, partially, that Harwick hadn't been fully professional, that the room service charge looked worse than I'd explained, and that I wanted to start over. I said I'd answer his questions if he agreed not to use anything in a formal process. I chose those words deliberately and watched his face. He asked what I meant. I said I could feel something being built in the Home Office. He said it was household administration, that the right time to tell him anything was before it was complete, and it would be complete by Friday. He showed me his phone, the household email open, an HR message preview visible. Dear Mr. Marsh, this is to confirm receipt of the documentation you submitted on. He asked if I'd read it. I said I'd seen the subject line accidentally. He said the documentation was submitted in his name, related to his interests, and wasn't mine to manage. He'd closed the shared inbox that week. He stood and said he'd offered honesty 3 times, and each time I'd reduced what I admitted to the smallest possible amount. One final time. If I wanted to tell him the full truth about Harwick, he was ready to hear it. The week wasn't over. I said he was making me feel like a defendant. He said he was going to work. At the door he said, not as warning but as fact, that by Friday he'd have completed what he needed, and from then he'd be organising our shared life differently. I'd receive information through the appropriate channel. He hoped I'd be somewhere comfortable when it came. He left, and I stood holding cold coffee with no useful way to interpret what I'd heard. Wednesday, in the pharmacy queue at Aldervane's annex, Griffin texted, his first personal message in 3 weeks, saying he'd been asked to attend an HR meeting Thursday. I turned my phone face down. When I looked up, Priya Senthil was behind me in the queue, eyes on a point just past my shoulder. She checked her own phone. The moment passed, but Griffin's name had been in the notification preview in large text, and Priya had been close enough to read it. Thursday evening, the Home Office door was left open. Deliberately, I understood. The way a person leaves a room open when they have nothing left to hide and nothing left to offer. The desktop showed a clean folder tree, home, auto, bank, ALD, and 1 labelled with that day's date. The ALD folder had been modified that morning. A Cloud Sync badge showed 4 files uploaded to an account I didn't recognise. Declan came home at 6:30, quieter than I'd heard in weeks. Not tense, but settled, the way water is quiet after finding the level it was always going to reach. He asked if Noah had eaten, went to his room, sat on the bed while Noah showed him a drawing, and laughed. A real uncomplicated laugh. I stood in the hallway and felt the distance of it, not as anger or jealousy, only the recognition that something had moved to a place I could no longer reach. I'd spent 4 weeks being first to speak. I'd given Cleo my version, The Office my version, Remy an edited version. Every move was designed to name the story before anyone else could. I'd believed being first meant controlling the outcome. What I couldn't accommodate was the possibility that Declan hadn't been managing a story at all, that while I performed for one audience after another, he'd been assembling something that didn't need an audience to hold together. I told myself to call Cleo. I sat on the sofa and called no one. At 2 a.m., the soft beep of an automated backup completing in the home office, confirmatory, indifferent to what I thought about it. Morning. A torn line from his notepad, the impression showing Thursday, and a building name starting with M. I photographed it. Too faint. He said good morning, asked about the weekend. I said I didn't know. He took his keys, right pocket now, not left, and left. At 9:47 a.m., forwarded from the closing shared account, Aldervane Group, HR Matter, Tate/Marsh, Notice of Scheduling. I read the first line and sat down. My name was in a formal process I hadn't initiated and hadn't known I could be entered into. That was the mistake I hadn't seen. I'd spent all my energy on what was said, and none on what had been filed. The Aldervane main tower lobby was glass and pale marble, a long reception desk along the right wall, 2 seating cubes in the centre, and the elevator banks at the back. I arrived at 9:18 on Monday morning, swiped my lanyard badge at the turnstile, the same magnetic strip, a new badge cycle, warm from the bag, and I was crossing toward the elevators when the receptionist called my full name. A woman I had never seen before was standing to the side of the reception desk, mid-40s, plain jacket, carrying a sealed legal envelope with a processing stamp I recognized from administrative work. She confirmed my full legal name and my job title. I confirmed both. She handed me the envelope, noted the time on a printed delivery confirmation sheet, 9:21 a.m., the location, my initials, and told me I had been served. She said it without any particular emphasis, the way someone states a fact that is complete in itself. Warren Chu's executive assistant was crossing the lobby behind me at that exact moment, carrying coffee and a tablet. She paused for 1 second, took in the envelope and the notation sheet, and continued to the elevator without saying anything. I sat at one of the seating cubes and opened it. The petition was formal and cleanly organised: dissolution of marriage, initiating party Declan Marsh, temporary financial orders already filed and actioned, joint account freeze effective that morning, secondary card deactivated, marital property listed and flagged for valuation. The evidence schedule attached was what I had not been prepared for. It named the corporate travel system entry log, showing my badge number linked to room 714 entries and exits on the night in question. It named the room's service charge, with its time and floor delivery notation. It included the screenshotted social media post with its timestamp from before I deleted it. It included the banquet photograph with Griffin's table placard visible in the background. It included a documented record of 5 separate dialogue attempts, each with a date and a setting. And it included a statement from Priya Senthil confirming the behavioural observations she had submitted to HR. The room service charge. The lanyard log. The post I deleted at 1:15. The comments I made at the banquet table. The 5 conversations I had deflected with varying levels of contempt. All of it in order, with dates, with connections, holding its shape without needing me to agree with it. I called Declan. He did not answer. I went up to the 4th floor and was told by Griffin's assistant that he was in an HR-facilitated review and was unavailable. Through the glass wall I could see Warren Chu and an external advisor I didn't recognise, and Griffin seated across from them with a folder on the table, and the door was completely closed. I went back to the lobby. Priya was at the reception desk collecting a visitor pass, and she looked at the envelope in my hand and said nothing that was not required by the situation. I told the receptionist there had been a misunderstanding in the documentation and I needed to speak with someone about the process. She said pleasantly that she was not able to assist with legal correspondence and suggested I contact the representative whose details were in the document. I called Cleo. She did not answer. I typed a message to the group chat. It was delivered. No one opened it. What I had believed, from the morning I constructed my version on the train back from Harwick, was that controlling the shape of a story meant controlling its outcome. I had believed that a man who was methodical and quiet was by definition slower than I was, and that speed in managing a narrative was a form of power. What I had not understood, what I was standing in a glass lobby understanding very clearly and very late, was that Declan had not been managing a narrative at all. He had been building a record, and a record does not need to persuade anyone or perform for anyone or be believed by anyone. It simply exists. The things I had dismissed as minor manageable moments, the room service charge, the lanyard entry log, the photograph I posted on a Saturday morning and deleted 45 minutes later, the comments I made at a banquet table in front of 200 people, had been dated and documented and assembled with the patience of a man who had asked me 5 separate times to tell him the truth and had prepared himself for the possibility that I would not. My speed had generated the evidence. His patience had organised it. Closure. Snapshot. The temporary financial orders became interim orders before the response window closed. The house lease was in Declan's name. I had 60 days from the order date. My mother's spare room had floral wallpaper and a window that faced a fence. Cleo replied 3 weeks later with one message, kind, brief, saying she needed some space to think. Griffin's position as VP of Events was frozen pending the conduct review. His name was removed from the internal project board by the following Monday. Declan did not re-emerge in my life as anything except Noah's pickup schedule and a name on correspondence. The 41 people who had seen the post before I deleted it included Priya, and Priya's saved copy was in a file I had no access to. The conference lanyard from Harwick was still at the bottom of my tote bag. I had not thrown it away.